Yes, has the president seen the letter that Laura Balsotis' husband, widower, sent to Jack Dorsey, Twitter's CEO, saying that his tweets were emotionally traumatic for him and for his wife's family?
I don't know if he's seen the letter, but I do know that our hearts are with Lori's family at this time.
Why is the president making these unfounded allegations? I mean, this is pretty nuts, isn't it? The president's accusing somebody of possible murder. The family is pleading with the president to please stop unfounded conspiracy theories. Why is he doing it?
Well, I would note that the president said this morning that this is not an original Trump thought, and it is not. In fact, 2003 on Don Imus's show, it was Don Imus and Joe Scarborough that joked about killing an intern, joked and laughed about it. So that was, I'm sure, pretty hurtful to Lori's family, and Joe Scarborough himself brought this up with Don Imus, and Joe Scarborough himself can answer it.
He's the president of the United States, and he's accusing somebody of possibly murder. I mean, this is different. He's not a private citizen. He's the president.
Yeah, and Joe Scarborough, if we want to start talking about false accusations, we have quite a few we can go through about Mika asserting,
I'm asking about the
Mika
president's, I'm
Brzezinski.
asking about the president's allegation.
And,
here.
I'm replying to you and saying this morning, as recently, I believe it was this morning or yesterday, Mika accused the president of being responsible for 100,000 deaths in this country. That's incredibly irresponsible. They've dragged his family through the mud. They've made false accusations that I won't go through, that I would not say from this podium, against the president of the United States, and they should be held to account for their falsehoods. Joe Scarborough should be held to account for saying people will die by taking hydroxychloroquine. Never mind the millions of Americans and people across the world who take it for rheumatoid arthritis and other reasons. There are a litany of false headlines like Mika.
The president spreading a false conspiracy theory that suggests that he's responsible for murder?
I would point you back to Joe Scarborough, who laughed and joked about this item on Don Imus's show. It's Joe Scarborough that has to answer these questions.
I'm going to read something really quickly. Timothy Claw Sotis wrote, quote, "Conspiracy theorists, including most recently the President of the United States, continue to spread their vile and misinformation on the platform, disparaging the memory of my wife. Why won't the President give this widower peace and stop tweeting about this conspiracy theory involving his wife? Why can't this widower get peace from the president?"
I've already asked and answered this question, and our hearts are with Lori, and I think the onus is on Joe Scarborough to explain his interaction with Don Imus and his laughing on this very matter on Don Imus's show. Chanel.
The widower is talking specifically about the president. Are you not going to answer that?
Warrants with regards to ex-CIA Chief John Brennan.
Yet again, White House reporters are finally learning that the way to get Trump's press secretary to either answer the question or to prove that she won't, which is an answer in and of itself, is to band together and ask the same question over and over. For an administration that thinks it can simply steamroll its way past accountability, this is a tactic that absolutely needs to endure. The question came in response to a vile conspiracy theory that Trump has been spreading with increasing frequency on Twitter. For years, but especially this month, Trump has been claiming that Joe Scarborough is the subject of a cold case. He wrote, quote, "A lot of interest in this story about psycho Joe Scarborough, so a young marathon runner just happened to faint in his office, hit her head on his desk, and die. I would think there is a lot more to this story than that. An affair? What about the so-called investigator? Read story." There were more tweets along the same lines, obviously not worth dictating, but the point here is this. Trump is actively spreading a false and defamatory conspiracy theory at the expense of a grieving widower to settle a petty grudge that he has against a morning TV host who won't give him fawning coverage. And this is Trump basically on the campaign trail. This is him on his best behavior. This is his pitch to voters. As a result of Trump's conspiracy theory, the widower of the woman whose memory the president is currently dragging through the mud wrote a letter to Jack Dorsey, the CEO of Twitter, explaining unequivocally that she was not murdered by Joe Scarborough, but rather that she had an undiagnosed heart condition, fell and hit her head on her desk at work, where she was found dead the next morning. It was a tragic death unto itself, now made leagues worse by the fact that the person with the biggest platform in the world is using it to advance his own personal agenda of settling grudges. He asked for Twitter to delete the tweets, which Twitter refused to do, claiming that they don't violate their terms of service. Now, these platforms' capitulation to people like Donald Trump is an entirely separate issue, but suffice it to say that they clearly have an interest in keeping him on there because even scandals like these ultimately bring attention to the platform. And look, while there have been calls for Trump's Twitter account to be suspended, here's the thing about that. The problem isn't his Twitter feed, the problem is him. Taking away his access to Twitter isn't going to change the fact that we have a depraved individual leading this country. And in fact, it'll only serve to amplify his accusations of censorship. So instead of band-aid fixes like revoking his access to Twitter, we should instead be focusing on the root of the problem, which is taking away his power altogether and voting him out of office. Until then, we should be used to these kinds of baseless outbursts because they show two things. One, that Trump is feeling desperate. If he was confident in his position 5 months out from the general election, he wouldn't need to lob insane attacks and cook up fake scandals about Obama and Biden and pretend that members of the so-called liberal media are murderers. These are the unhinged ramblings of a man who knows he's in a dire position. The only problem for him is that instead of doing something to help himself, he's only exacerbating his issues and entrenching his own poor position. And two, he needs a distraction from his own handling of the outbreak. Think about it. If the guy actually thought he'd done a good job, he'd focus on the US response to the virus on the campaign trail. But instead, the fact that we've gotten Obamagate and Joe Scarborough's cold case is all the proof in the world that he knows he's screwed up. And as more Americans die because of the botched White House response, you can expect yet more conspiracy theories and lunacy from Trump. But that doesn't mean you have to take it seriously. The only thing it should tell you is that this is a man who is willing to destroy a grieving widower's wife to settle a petty grudge he has with a TV host who's critical of him. And when it's time to cast your vote in November, you should think long and hard about whether that's someone who you believe should have the nuclear codes.